Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film My Neighbor Totoro. And this is continuing my quest to review all of the films ever released by Studio Ghibli. Unlike a lot of kids' films, this doesn't have an antagonist or a traditionally structured plot. Although Hayao Miyazaki's previous films before this very much did have a plot, were interesting ways to go about conflict and show multi-dimensional characters from both the bad guys and the good guys. This film doesn't do that at all. When I was looking through about this film, a lot of people's complaints with My Neighbor Totoro is that it has such a loose plot. It's really just about two little girls, Sasuke and Mei, who move in with their dad to a new home where they're moving because their mother is sick in the hospital, and they're setting up and so she can live there and get more fresh air. And then they meet the magical creature of Totoro and Cat Bus, but that's really all that happens. Everyday, normal kind of kids stuff that's going on in a lot of this film. The scene where Sasuke and Mei are just going and opening every door in the new house to see what's there and making lots of noise and having lots of fun, you know, that seems so real. And I think that's one of the things when I think of My Neighbor Totoro, not that it's an amazing fantasy film, which it truly is, but also how it really captures childhood in a way. How I don't feel like I'm watching a Hollywood version of childhood. I really feel like I'm experiencing these kids moving in to a new house and a new neighborhood. Hayao Miyazaki wanted to make this film for a while, and it had been a pet project of his. And for a while he just considered making this into a children's book. He didn't really feel like it could be made into a film because it didn't really have a plot, and it was a little different from what was really going on in Japanese animation and animation in general. He didn't really think it would have commercial prospects. This was his first film to be featured in Japan. His other films were featured in fictional worlds or worlds based on more European influences. The only one I can think of is Panda Go Panda, but other than that, his films really took place in kind of fictional worlds or different worlds. And this is a director who loves environment and loves showing environment. Instead of falling in love with a fictional world, he shows the country of Japan and the environment of Japan in a way that he hasn't shown before. And he almost is more into the environment in this film than I think any of his previous or future films. That's where he grew up. That was near where they helped make the film and worked on other films in areas like that. He loved going for walks, and he based all of that and made it into one out in the country experience. You really get a sense of like the way he shows backgrounds in this film, the way he shows the landscapes and the trees and the bugs and the tadpoles. And actually on the Blu-ray they show various places that this film was based on, and it's pretty identical actually. A lot of Japanese animation early on, the characters were more European looking, but I think he really went for it with this film. And not having a plot also, this is kind of more of a plot you'd expect from like a foreign film and less from a Hollywood film. It's harder almost to not rely on genre or structure or anything like that and tell a story this way. And even though, you know, Totoro doesn't show up until 45 minutes, I think, into the film or halfway through the film, I'm never really bored while watching it. It's a kind of film that always surprised me at how good it was at being a kid's film, but without having conflict or without having an unnecessary, like, hokey villain. The characters go through hardships because their mother's in the hospital, and that was actually based on Miyazaki's own mother, who was in the hospital for, I believe it was tuberculosis. His mother was in the hospital for something like 8-9 years, or for a while at least. I'm not sure the exact timeline. This is really based on him and his brother, and if they had been little boys instead of little girls, he doesn't think he could have really made this film. And it was a very personal film. You get that. It feels like kind of a brisk walk in the woods. It feels like a personal experience to someone, and it doesn't feel like that personal experience put into a commercial prospect. And I think that's one of the things that feels so different about My Neighbor Totoro. Most kids' films, and like a G-rated kind of film, are either talking down to the audience or trying to appeal to the audience. And it's almost like Miyazaki just didn't care as much. Like, he wanted to make this kind of film. He wanted to make this personal kids film, and it works so amazingly in a way that it just has some kind of magic to it. The loose way it works. It feels like Fellini, and it feels like a foreign film, but it's so Japanese, I don't think you could tell it any other way. This film actually was not successful when it came out, and it wasn't until about a year later they played it on TV and it became a huge hit, and they started marketing Totoro dolls and the merchandising took off, and suddenly Totoro became a major film. But it took a while. It was hard probably to market because it came out on probably one of the greatest double bills in cinematic history, certainly in animation history, with My Neighbor Totoro and Grave of the Fireflies together. But My Neighbor Totoro was an original property, and it was different from Nausicaa and Castle in the Sky. Kind of have some similarities, and Castle of Cagliostro is the second Lupin movie. But much like Castle of Cagliostro, the perception of that film grew a lot after the film came out. That film didn't do very well. But now it's probably the most famous Lupin the Third movie. Just like My Neighbor Totoro is now the most famous Studio Ghibli film and the most famous Hayao Miyazaki film. Maybe Spirited Away is a little more well known, but I think My Neighbor Totoro, you see Totoro dolls everywhere. It's such a mass marketed thing. I always feel like when I meet someone who's really into it, it feels like very personal, because you've experienced this personal story. The music, which is by Joe Hisaishi, does the same thing, like where he has some orchestral stuff and he has some synthesizer stuff, and it goes all over the place. But in this film, like, I never really noticed it. Now that I'm learning more of his scores as I'm watching all these Studio Ghibli films, I'm noticing how many different styles of music he uses when he makes his scores. If someone's thought this was several different composers, it wouldn't be too crazy of an opinion. And in this film, he gets it to flow a lot better. I thought when I saw Nausicaa, it really felt like different composers, each different piece. But in this one, they are very different, but there's kind of a flow to them that kind of brings this film together. It's really what this film needed. I don't think it would have worked with the same kind of score as Nausicaa. Obviously, they're really different films. It's interesting, a director who, in his 3 previous films, all had action sequences, and then in My Neighbor Totoro, he's just stripped of all of that. This is such a ridiculous left turn from what Hayao Miyazaki was doing previously. And I think that's why there does seem to be a division even among fans of its greatness. But I remember when I saw it, and I wasn't really the target age group, and I heard it was this great kids film, I was like, all right. I remember that weekend I watched it several times, and I was just so enamored with it, and it's just something I couldn't explain. Like, I tried to understand the story of this and how this would work, and now that I'm rewatched it several times for this review, I kind of look at it and go, you know, Totoro's very strange, he's unexplainable, you don't really understand his motivations, he's a really bizarre looking character, same with the cat bus and the smaller Totoros. It's a really strange, odd movie, and it's kind of amazing that it turns out as well as it does. When I watch a film like this, it reminds me why Miyazaki became such a name in animation, why this has become one of what is considered to be one of the greatest animated films of all time. He understood his characters very well. You look at Sasuke and Mei, and they're so well defined, and originally he was just going to do one little girl. I don't think the film would work as well with only one girl. They're so well defined and different, they really feel like siblings. Siblings, or at least with my siblings, everyone has a different personality. Everyone's very different in their roles, and Satsuki and Mei, you know, Mei's like so defiant and really wants to proclaim how strong she is, but she's still like a little kid, and Satsuki is very responsible, looks after Mei, but you know, still she's very fragile, more fragile than she'd probably admit. They're such strongly made characters. Then when you get to Totoro, who I don't understand when I'm thinking about his motivations, but I kind of love that I don't. I've read stuff written by Hayao Miyazaki, and he is an animal. He doesn't understand certain things. He is a spirit god who lives in the forest. That's kind of what's so amazing about him and so makes you want to hug him and all those things. Is Totoro's almost beyond explanation. His motivations are odd, and he doesn't really even, in the end, save the day. He kind of just helps out. After I saw this one, I wish I could get a Totoro stuffed animal. I still don't have any Totoro stuff, really. That drive to get it, I understand that apparently after they played My Neighbor Totoro on Japanese TV, they said they would be giving away some of the first Totoro dolls if you just send in a postcard, and apparently they got flooded with tons and tons of postcards. They didn't know what to do with them all because so many people wanted one, and I always feel that way after I watch this film. He has that magic to him, but I think what's made him different is that he's unpretentious. There's no My Neighbor Totoro franchise. It's just this film. It's just this experience. It's an odd film to do in the order I'm doing this because it almost doesn't fit in, but it's the film I think of when I think of Hayao Miyazaki. It's the symbol you think of. It's the logo for Studio Ghibli. I don't know if it necessarily is a great genre example of that, but it's so fucking good. I don't understand it. I don't know if I can understand how this film happened, but it kind of does make sense. You know, the love of nature, the well-defined characters, the craftsman-like storyteller that he was. He's becoming the master storyteller that he would become, and would become the legend that he was throughout the rest of his career. And I kind of understand that because he understood how to do character. He understood how to do a story without genre conventions and everything, and he understood how to make more well-defined characters. This is his smart kids film. Castle in the Sky is still a smart kids film, but this is a whole nother level. It has such an amazing energy to it, and you really feel like you're experiencing things as a kid, and you feel like you're going into a different world, and you're seeing something very Japanese and experiencing this Japanese countryside and these little girls moving into an area. That's kind of the magic of it. I don't know if there's any way to really explain it, and that's kind of why it's so good. There's certain films that I've always been afraid to review because I just like them so much, and I almost don't want to analyze them and figure out their magic. And My Neighbor Totoro, you know, I watched it a lot of times because I was kind of just scared. I feel like I'm going to feel that way about a lot of these Studio Ghibli films because they mean something to me. Not because I have a certain personal memory or anything like that. It's just the experience of them and the love I have for these characters and these stories just feels very intense. And seeing the story of Sasuke and Mei and Totoro has that for me. And I think because it's so human and relatable, it feels more realer to me. I could watch this probably 10 years from now and still see deeper things in it and still wonder how he pulled a film like this off, in a kid's film that feels as loose as it is and as organized as it is and well thought out as it is at the same time. Every time I see this film, I always am kind of in awe of it. My Neighbor Totoro is an amazingly great kids film, and I think it's one of the reasons when I was looking at Nausicaa, and I was like, you know, he makes really great female characters, and he makes really great conflicts, like well organized, almost adult conflicts out of these ideas that normally wouldn't be treated as such. That was the whole idea when he started, from Horace Prince of the Sun onward, with Isao Takahata, is that they would kind of make animation more than it was. And I think My Neighbor Totoro does that to kind of the highest regard, because you couldn't imagine an animated film being this way before. It just didn't really happen. The looseness of the plot, how relatable the characters were. You'd have to have a musical sequence or an action sequence and everything like that. And Miyazaki's defiance in making a film like this, and I don't think he meant it as rebellious. This is the kind of film he wanted to make, and it's so unique in that sense that it's amazing. And I think that's the thing I've always liked about Miyazaki, is he understands how to tell a good story, he understands the rules to it, and he understands how to use character and plot and how to be true to those characters and have everything make sense and work. And he's made some amazing, incredibly relatable, huggable, glorious characters. And I think My Neighbor Totoro shows that more than any of them. And it shows why people put him in such high regard, as much as it doesn't really show the kind of films he would make throughout the rest of his career. It might not be the example that Nausicaa or Kiki or Porco Rosso, I think those are kind of the normal kind of Miyazaki film. But this is kind of the exceptional masterpiece that tops it all off. While I experienced it as many times as I had while I was preparing for this review, I realized that it's just such a unique, odd little movie. And that's just why it's so amazing, because it just has a charm that will never wear off. And I think that shows how great of a storyteller Hayao Miyazaki is, and how great of a film My Neighbor Totoro is and always will be. So if you have seen My Neighbor Totoro and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. My next Studio Ghibli film will be Grave of the Fireflies. That will be probably mid to late August. I'm going to need to spend some time on that one. Check out my other Studio Ghibli reviews in the Studio Ghibli review playlist, which will be an annotation below. I hope to see you next time, and thank you very much for watching.